But one of the things we have to address is the unemployment picture, not only the big picture, as we saw on Friday, but what's happening to our countrymen, to African Americans. And to help us understand this picture is Bill Rodgers. He is joining us. He's a professor and chief economist at the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development. He's also Rutgers University and former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. Bill, always good to see you. And I want to quote something from a column that you published last week in which you said, quote, "The share of Black high school graduates that were employed just before the coronavirus crisis took hold is still well below its pre-Great Recession level. This is also true for Black college graduates." That defies what I think many of us thought were real gains that were being made in the years before COVID-19.
Of course. And the reason that occurred is that we have a president who just singularly focuses on the unemployment rate. And that is the share of the labor force that is actively searching for a job. And yes, that statistic for African Americans, for whites, for Latinos, all came down to historical lows. But something we saw during this expansion was a decline in what is labor economists call the labor force participation rate. That is the share of the population, that's the filling population, that's either has a job or they're actively searching. And so when you look at that statistic or another statistic called the employment population ratio, the share who've got a job, you get a very different story. That, as you said, minorities and even highly educated African Americans still just barely recovered from this expansion. And if you look at income, household income, a similar thing. It took 10 years for Black income to return to its pre-recession level.
Hey, Bill, it's Julie here. So what is happening now as we are seeing unemployment spiking? As we know, it is, I mean, there's sort of a mix of what's going on here. The people who can work from home in many cases are. The people who are lower income are in some cases deemed essential, but not always. Do we know yet how this is affecting minority communities?
Yeah, last Friday's job report began to give us a real crystallized flavor. Half of the jobs in leisure and hospitality were shed over the last month. African Americans, Latinos, women make up a disproportionate share of those workers. And so that's why we saw a spike in their unemployment rate, but we also saw big drops in their employment population ratios or their labor force participation ratios. That's on the economic side. On the health side, as you said, these people are working in essential jobs, and they're on the front line, right, fighting the virus. And so they're getting a health shock, or they're getting a health disadvantage, and they're also getting this economic disadvantage. And so that's where Governor Cuomo and others have asked for a hazard pay or other ways to provide compensation for these individuals who are, and all Americans are hardworking, but these people are, right, who are in the trenches are really, really working hard now.
Hi, Professor Rodgers. It's Julia LaRoche. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for bringing up this really important topic. I understand that you're helping advise the governor in New Jersey on the reopening process, and we don't want this issue to fall by the wayside. How do you make sure it doesn't fall by the wayside here? And, you know, people are now becoming more and more aware of how do we make sure that there's actual action as we move to the other side of the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you, and great to see you. One of my sort of reasons for accepting the invitation was the language that Governor Murphy has been using, and it's, but not just language. I think it's Italy too, is in his heart, that we need to use this opportunity as an opportunity to address the longstanding racial and class income issues and unemployment issues that we have in New Jersey, whether it be a young child growing up in Newark, that he or she needs to have the same opportunities for prosperity as the young child who lives in Princeton. So we just started our work last week. We'll be diving into the issues this week and the weeks coming, and I look forward to sharing our experiences. But I'm heartened that not just the governor, but it seems to be cabinet members, even our business leaders recognize that all economics is local. And that we have 40% of our households are what we call ALICE. That ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained and Employed. Bottom line is these people are living below the living wage, and a functioning and vibrant economy can't sustain itself that way.
Hey, Bill, it's Brian Chung, and as you highlight, the demographic breakdown of the unemployment report last week really shows the impact on minority communities. But on the labor demand side of things, right, there are a lot of these small businesses in these minority-owned communities that are really hard hit as well. And it was actually interesting. There's a New York Fed survey that said that minority-owned businesses, particularly Black businesses, have more difficulty accessing credit, making payments on debt, which could really hurt their ability to then rehire people when the recovery does eventually come. How does that factor into expectations for, if there is some semblance of a V-shaped recovery, whether or not minority communities can ride the wave as well?
Another great point. I'm glad you brought it up. And it was, as we go forward, there's the short-term solutions that we have to implement, and there are these longer-term structural questions, which Julia was getting us into. And on the short term, we also even have to think about our policies and make sure that those are policies that don't exacerbate or perpetuate inequality. And this was an example of where one, I'll call it triple P because it's a tongue twister, but the Paycheck Protection Program, in its first round, right, the conversation about minority and women-owned businesses was absent, right? It took public opinion to rising up to get aid and get dollars to those communities, because these are communities where these small businesses are vital for the economic survival and the prosperity, right, of those communities.
Bill Rodgers, professor and chief economist at the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University. Thank you for being here. Stay well. It's always good to see you here on The Move.
Peace.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.